So, hello everyone. Thanks for being here. So I'm here to talk about Ember, and the title of this talk is "Work Smarter, Not Harder," and that's kind of a pervasive philosophy in the Ember community. And so, why don't we dive in? I'm Erik Bryn, as Ted mentioned. I've been really lucky. I've been able to make working on Ember my full-time job. I have my own consulting company and training company called Prototypal. You can follow me on Twitter and check out what I'm up to on prototypal.io. If you have any questions, feel free to tweet at me or email me as well. So Ember 1.0 came out all the way back in August of 2013. And it turns out that so you might think, okay, Ember's about 2 years old. However, I just recently had an anniversary, and one of my first contribution to Ember actually was back June 2nd, 2011. And so it's been 4 years now that I've been working on Ember, but it's only been like 2 years since Ember 1.0 came out. So it turns out that it took us 2 years to 1.0, and now I'm here, roughly 2 years after our 1.0 to talk about 2.0. So we've had a lot of versions of Ember basically since August. And today's version of Ember is Ember 1.12, and that's our stable release. Now, there also is right now a beta release, and I'll talk a little bit about our release process in a second, but basically every time there's a stable release, there's also a beta release, and there's also a canary release. And so right now we're on Ember 1.13 beta 2, and in Ember 1.13 we're really excited about 1.13 because 1.13 brought our new rendering engine called Glimmer. And if you're not familiar with Glimmer, basically we took a lot of the great ideas that React kind of pioneered with the virtual DOM and the re-render everything programming model, and we've brought that to Ember now. And we brought that to Ember not by breaking the framework and making you rewrite your apps, but we've actually been able to transparently bring it in, and it just works with your existing code. So we're rewarding our community basically by being a part of it since the early days. You don't have to do much work. Ember's now faster, and if you want, you can start taking advantage of some of the different programming model changes. So we have an interesting release cycle with Ember. It's based off of the Chrome release cycle. So you've probably heard of this thing called Chrome Canary, and people tell you to use it every once in a while when there's a bug maybe in Chrome stable. And so we have a similar model where basically every 6 weeks there's a new release, roughly every 6 weeks. And so that means there's a new stable release. So that's how since August 2013, we've climbed up 13 point releases. And at that 6 week point, we take what is our master and we make that our beta branch. And the interesting thing about that is that we actually require all new features to the framework to actually be feature flagged. And so we can have rapid development happening on master, but we can still choose to curate what actually ends up in our stable builds by having this feature flagging system in our beta builds. So a new feature comes into master or canary, you can start using it as soon as it lands if you're running your app on the canary builds. You can opt in and opt out of specific features. And then when the core team decides that a feature is ready for production, then we put it out enabled by default in the beta branches. And those beta releases happen, on that 6 week mark, and they actually happen roughly every week as well. So as bug reports come in, we can fix them on the beta branch and obviously as well on the canary branch. And if a feature is ready to go, then we go it, and it ends up in stable within a matter of 6 weeks. So for the community, this is a really compelling thing because if you're a contributor, we've basically told you if you get a feature landed on master and the core team thinks it's a great idea and we want to enable it by default, we're talking about a matter of a month and a half and it's already in a released version of Ember, basically. Obviously it can vary depending on where in the release process the feature's landing, but this is really neat. And so what that means is while we have our Ember 1.13 is in beta, Canary actually happens to be Ember 2.0. And so this is a bit of a unique release because we've decided to increment our major version. I'll talk a bit more about why in a bit. But basically, our first beta of Ember 2.0 is landing in I guess, tomorrow. Yet here I am giving this talk instead of helping out. So, so tomorrow, our first beta of Ember 2.0 is coming out, and it's going to have roughly 6 betas, because every week there's going to be a new release. And then in 6 weeks from tomorrow, Ember 2.0 stable will be out, right? Now this is interesting. This release cycle, a lot of people think it's, kind of breakneck speed, like, oh my God, there's so many releases of Ember. But we follow Semver. So these releases don't mean your application's breaking. They just mean you're getting bug fixes and new features at a predictable pace. And you're not waiting. We've made many mistakes. I said it took us 2 years to get to 1.0. We waited too long to 1.0, right? It's kind of natural to wait. And when we have a predictable release cycle, it means that the core team is not able to delay releases. Bug fixes that might be crucial to you are going to end up on a stable release at a predictable schedule, perhaps, right? And so, and that also makes the community contributors happy as well, right? And so, we'll talk more about Ember 2.0 in a bit, but JavaScript has come quite a long way. I mean, look, the talk before us was talking about how a big company like Intuit is using JavaScript in mission-critical, back-end infrastructure, right? And of course, on the front end as well. It's come a long way, but the ecosystem hasn't necessarily come all the way that we would like. It's certainly in a great place, better than it's ever been, right? But if you go and you compare it to mature platforms like Java or Ruby or Python, there are a lot of missing pieces and a lot of, brittle infrastructure. And so the world of Ember 1.0 was very much that world. We couldn't deliver as robust of a solution to our users to abstract away all of the minutia that comes with building a front-end JavaScript application, because we had to build on top of the platform that we'd been given. And so 2 years ago, there were no real winners in the build tools arena or anything like that, right? And so one of the first things you do when you start writing a front-end application is you figure out how you're going to take all the files of JavaScript that you want to write and clobber those together into one concatenated file, probably, right? So that you can ship that efficiently to your users, right? And so you start concatenation's kind of one of the first things, but then you'll very quickly be like, well, how do I organize my code? Globals seem bad. Okay, a module system. Which one? There's like 3 or 4. The ecosystem has matured quite a bit, and so we've got answers to a lot of those questions today. And so now, the world of 2.0 comes batteries included. And this is kind of, I should have a little caveat here, because we've had this technology in Ember 1.0. We've been maturing it basically for the last year. And so a lot of the people in the Ember community have been utilizing our, infrastructure, basically. Ember is not just a JavaScript include that you put on the page now. It's a whole suite of tools. It's a full stack front-end framework. And so Ember CLI is at the heart of that, and it's built upon a foundation of other open source technologies that you probably know. Node.js, obviously, right? We don't want to have our front-end build infrastructure written in a different language than we're using ourselves, because if we did that, we wouldn't be able to as easily contribute to it, right? So we needed to build a build infrastructure that was on top of Node, on top of NPM, right? We, at the time when we started building this stuff, there wasn't a clear winner. Grunt was the state of the art at the time in build tools, and we've come a long way since then. There's a lot of solutions out there like Gulp, and we actually helped architect and build Broccoli, which is the build system that Ember CLI uses, and soon Angular 2's build. So this stuff Angular 2 really likes, and so they're actually taking Ember CLI and making it more generic, and they're going to be using it for their build system as well. So they're kind of betting on the same platform that we are. So I think that you're going to see this foundation of Broccoli and Babel basically be well, I guess they're swapping out Babel for TypeScript. So, anyways, Broccoli is going to have a lot of, usage behind it. It's probably, everybody using Ember CLI today doesn't know that they're using Broccoli, but it's actually one of the primitives underneath that gives us a really fast and intelligent build system. So, like I said, Ember is really shooting to be the full stack front-end framework. And so rather than sit up here and give you guys a lecture with slides, I'm going to actually show you what it's like to build an Ember application. So I've learned a lot of lessons after giving a lot of these types of presentations that I've decided to not live code this. I'm actually not bad at doing it, but I've learned, I'm wiser and older now. I have pre-recorded some snippets here. So let's walk through those. So I just did this stuff recently, so this is targeted for you guys. So what we're going to do is build our first Ember app using Ember CLI. Now, we had npm installed it previously, so now we have this Ember new command. And this is going to take a little while because it's going over hotel Wi-Fi to npm and downloading many, many packages. So I'll fast forward through this. But basically, there's not much to see here. It installs a bunch of stuff from npm, and then it also, interestingly, gets some client-side dependencies from Bower as well. So I didn't mention it on the foundation slide because we actually think that we're going to be removing our usage of Bower in the ecosystem, in the Ember ecosystem, because we've been working closely with the npm team, and now a lot of the needs that we had that we were choosing to use Bower for, npm is solving. Projects like jQuery have basically bet on npm now. If you ever use any jQuery plugins, they're all kind of moving their ecosystem to npm. So we think npm's the winner, basically, in the package management story for JavaScript. So we're going to bet whole hog on it as well. And so, but for now, you do have the ability to do some Bower stuff. So that's what it's like to create an application. That's not too boring. That's kind of boring. It's not really too impressive. But the interesting thing here is that we can now start doing stuff in that application. So like, for example, one of the first things that you do when you're building an Ember application is you think about routes. Because we want Ember applications to be great web citizens. And what that means is that URLs should be paramount to the user's experience. Why? Because when you're building an application, you want to be able to take that URL, you want to share it with somebody else, right? I mean, there's some practical things as well. Like when you're developing, you want to be at the same, you want to be able to go to a URL or refresh your browser and end up in the same state of the application where you were before. And so we made a decision for Ember 1.0, basically, that was the router is a first-class citizen to the development experience. And what that means is we make you think about your routes up front. And that makes it so that you never get into a situation where there's a bug filed saying, hey, you know, we want to be able to share a link to this area, and the URL doesn't reflect the actual location of the application. Can you go, you know, add that URL routing back in, you know, for us? You just don't end up with those situations in Ember. You think in URLs, and you know, there's a whole ton of benefits that shake out of that, specifically around like data loading and state management. Having this system allows us to basically let you not have to worry about how data could load in the different ways that you might be navigating to an area of your application. The system can kind of just deal with it for you. So we can go generate a route, a hello world route. And so one of the interesting things here is that this goes and it creates all the files that are basically you know, necessary for a route. And so there's just a couple, there's a template file, a route file, and a test file. And so the interesting thing is Ember CLI comes with a test runner setup built in. And this is deployable to a CI environment with zero configuration. If you use Travis CI, you can push an Ember app to GitHub, enable Travis, and now your test suite is running. This is using Phantom.js to run it purely from the command line. But we have a really cool thing, which is Ember test -- server. If you're, you know, do test-driven development and you like having your tests be running automatically for you while you're developing, that's what Ember Test Server does. Now, Ember Test Server is built on top of a library called Testum, which you might have heard of. And Testum basically actually lets you run multiple browsers at the same time. And so here we've got a live development server. When we're you know, editing our code, we can actually have our test suite running in multiple browsers at once. And this is, all we have to do is go edit this testum.json file, and now I can add Firefox to the mix as well. And so now I just go back to the console, I can run Ember Test Server, and now we're going to be running our test suite in 3 browsers now. I could have added Safari. Now, the other cool thing about this is that we have Sauce Labs, a Sauce Labs add-on. So if you use Sauce Labs, your CI environment is just a few lines of one installation command and a couple environmental variable configurations for your tokens and stuff. And you're going to have this same test harness running in the cloud for you after every deploy. So this is the kind of stuff, when I say like a full stack framework, this is what I kind of mean. All these things come batteries included, and you're running, you're creating an application, and you're off to the races actually building features and the product itself, rather than spending weeks deciding what solution should we use for this, what solution should we use for that. This stuff is, all these decisions have been made for you, and it's a pretty robust and pluggable system. So if you need to, kind of choose a different default, you can do that. So, so that we talked about getting started. We talked about our first route. Let's talk about the development server now. And so, the development server, like you would expect, if we've got this test runner, we've got these generators, it would make sense for there to be a development server as well. And so, I would go so far to say is that Ember's development server is probably one of the most sophisticated ones you'll ever see. And so I don't have a ton of demos here about it, but basically it allows us to spool up the server, and here we are at our Ember application, right? Nothing fancy here. Now there's a couple things that I didn't have time to show you. One of which is this development server, it doesn't allow you to ever fetch assets while they're being built. What does that mean? Who's used Grunt Watch before? Raise your hand. Grunt Watch? All right. Raise your hand if you stare at the console waiting for it to finish building after every save. No? Really? You're lying. You totally do, right? Because you're staring there waiting for it, because you know if you go to the browser and refresh it, what's going to happen? You're going to have stale assets, and you're going to start like trying to work on the thing. You're going to be banging your head against the desk, wondering why the thing you just did doesn't reflect on the screen. Oh, it's because the build, I refreshed too soon, whatever, right? Ember's development server blocks HTTP requests for your assets, for your built assets. And so while the asset building's happening in the background, your development server will not serve those assets until they're built. So we eliminate that case, that whole problem space. What else do we do? Who stares at the console for their build errors? Liars. You all do, right? Because your development server is not smart. Ember Serv can actually show you build errors in the browser, and I'm telling you, one day somebody's going to write this super easy add-on that's going to actually let you click stack traces and stuff and actually open that in your IDE. That's like a few lines of code. I'm going to keep talking about it until somebody does it, and then I'll show off the add-on. But that's a great system, right? You don't want to be staring. A lot of people that I've worked with in the JavaScript, like advanced JavaScript developers, they have like a window system so that there's always a console showing, so that they can always see the status of their build. They're enslaved to their console, and I love liberating them of that by teaching them that better tools exist, and here they are, right? And so that's the development server experience. Let's talk about templates. So we generated a route, and that route has created us some files. And so here is this kind of standard layout of an Ember application. We've got an app folder, and then subfolders for the different types of objects that you'll be building in the application. And so we've got a route JavaScript file, which is where you write implementation and stuff. And then we've got a let me rewind a little bit. And then we've got an application.hps file, which is kind of like the global template that represents the standard layout that will exist across every route in the application. So let's say you had a nav bar that would be in the application template, assuming that you didn't have routes that didn't show the nav bar for login and logout state. Then you probably wouldn't put the nav bar in the application template, right? But every framework or front end or back end tends to have a concept of like the template that is globally used, right? You can think of it as the index.html maybe of your application. And so Ember CLI has auto-generated us that. And so when we look at the browser, that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing the index, the application HBS file. And so now if I go and change stuff inside of this file and save it, and then quickly switch back to the browser, I did not refresh that manually. What's going on? Ember CLI bundles live reload capability built in. And it's turned on by default. You can disable it if you don't like it. But now, by the time you're done saving, it's already reflected in the browser. And so, that helps you work smarter, right? That helps you work faster. And you didn't have to do anything. That's just the standard bundling of tools that we have. And so now we've generated this hello world route previously, and so now I can just go put HTML inside of this template. And so, hello there, enterprise. So now we don't see anything here because we haven't navigated to the route. If we just go to hello-world now, we can see our templates rendering, right? So let's reflect. All we did was Ember generate route hello-world. We went to hello-world, .hbs in our application, put something there, and now we can actually go there with a route. We did no other configuration. So what's happening under the hood here? Well, Ember CLI is actually creating this router mapping for you automatically. And so we've declared to the application that there is a hello world route. And there's a set of conventions, basically, that if you name your route something, then we'll look automatically for files that are also named the same thing. So when you define a route, we expect there to be a hello world route. If there's not one, we generate one for you automatically, like active code generation at runtime. We just generate it. So if you didn't want to create the file, you don't have to. You'll get the default, implementation. It's fine. Now, typically, you'll want to put a template there. Otherwise, the route won't show anything interesting, right? And so, that's what we will be looking for, the hello world template inside of the templates directory. So that's a quick primer on templates. Let's talk about acceptance testing. Who here writes Selenium tests? Raise your hand. Really? You guys just not test at all? What are you using? What do you guys use for doing high-level browser testing? Anything? No? So do people, does another team, does QA write the tests or something? Or are engineers writing tests on a regular basis? What's the story there? Okay. Okay. So Ember comes with both a unit testing setup and a lot of helpers that make it super simple for you to write unit tests. But it also comes with probably the most advanced or at least coolest architected acceptance testing framework. Some guy named Erik Bryn wrote it. I don't know. But it comes from a place of struggle where I used to write a lot of Ruby code in the past, and we had this great project called Capybara, which basically was like a nice little fancy domain-specific language for writing tests that utilized Selenium effectively, right? So they could drive a browser. And so if you wanted to do high-level user testing, like the user goes to this route and they can see that this button exists, or the list has 10 things in it, they can click that button, and then we see a loading spinner, and then, yada, 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 right? We can verify the behavior of the application matches what our expectations are from a user's perspective. That's what an acceptance test is to me. This terminology has been, muddied quite a bit because everybody has a different word for things. So acceptance testing means that in the Ember world pretty much. And so what we can do is we can actually generate an acceptance test just like anything else. You might notice a pattern. We have a bunch of generators. So we can generate an acceptance test for that route just by doing this. And so now we can go inside of our text editor and go down into our test folder. And inside this acceptance directory, we now have a hello world test. And this comes with a bunch of boilerplate that you can augment yourself, basically. Now, the important thing to note here, I missed it, is that we've got some tests. This is a very simple test, but you can see we have this visit helper. This visit helper is actually controlling the Ember application from a high level. It's saying, go to this URL. And we're not showing off a lot of features here, but we have a really nice API. You can say visit on this line. You can say click below it. You can say, fill in. You can say like, select this item in a select dropdown. And you can do all this stuff, and it looks like synchronous code. It's actually really cool. But of course, all of these user interface, behaviors have a ton of asynchrony behind them, right? And so the way that things like Selenium work is that they work by triggering actions in a browser, and then they poll, waiting, hoping that what the behavior was that you're expecting finishes within the allotted amount of time. Otherwise, what happens? It times out, and then your tests fail because of a timeout error, and you're not sure if maybe the backend server got slower, or the application has performance problems or whatever. It's not really well architected. The Selenium tests don't understand how the application actually works because it's testing at a super high level, right? Just by emulating basically clicks and stuff in the browser effectively. However, Ember's acceptance testing framework, we call it Ember testing, it's much smarter. It understands the types of asynchrony that is happening inside of the application. So it knows that there's AJAX requests pending. And so it will wait for those AJAX requests to finish. If you're doing set timeouts, it knows that you're doing set timeouts. And so we can actually give you a really nice synchronous API for writing these kinds of tests without having to muddy your thinking about what might the side effects be, the asynchronous side effects be when you're navigating around the application. And what else does that enable? It enables us to have a system that is super fast. We can run these acceptance tests in a single browser session, and they take like 50 milliseconds for each test. Like a simple test like this takes 50 milliseconds to run. Selenium takes, a second just to boot. So here you can see this is it turned out a little slower in this iteration, but basically 163 milliseconds to execute that very simple hello world acceptance test. And the cool thing is that this is actually running the application, and you can actually go in and add a nice little helper called pause test. So let's say you're writing the test, you're not sure what the state of the application is at one point in time. You can pause the test. There's the application for you to inspect. It's running. If there were links and you could actually use the app inside of the test runner here, and you can inspect the state of it just like you would be doing in development. You can't do this kind of stuff with Selenium very easily, if at all. I still haven't been able to figure out how to get like a remote debugger connected, so when you have like flaky, tests, you want to actually get down and debug what's going on. Good luck. It's tricky. This just comes out of the box, right? So that's acceptance testing. Let's talk about components. Components are the big thing. The applications are built out of components, and so let's just show you a brief example of creating a component. Of course, Ember generate is involved here. You might notice I'm going from generate to G. There's shorthand if the command's unambiguous. So I'm just generating a random image component. And a component consists of basically a JavaScript file for implementation, right, and a template file for the markup, right, the presentation. And of course, it's generating us a unit test file to keep nagging us that maybe we should be writing test code here, right? And it actually does give us a generated test that provides a little bit of value. So here we are inside of our app components and app template components directories. And so here's our template. I'm going to just put some simple markup here. This is going to be a random image component. So we're going to have an image tag, obviously. And the thing we're going to do here is we're going to bind the source of that image tag, right? So we're going to set it to some property image random URL. And then what we're going to do is inside of our component file, we're just going to expose a property named random URL so that the template has something to access, right? Now, this could be a property that we were passing into the component. If someone outside of the component wanted to be passing that in, let's say it came from an API call or whatever, we could be passing it in to the component itself. And so now we're going to go to our hello world route, and we're just going to invoke this component. Now, one thing to note is that in a future version of Ember, Ember 2.1, it's slotted for, we're going to actually be enabling custom element syntax for these components. So you'll be able to, it'll just look like normal HTML now. You'll be doing, angle brackets, random image, not these curlies. And so the Ember community is really excited for that. And so we have our random image component, and there it is. And so if we refresh the page a couple times, we're going to see some random images coming from this site called Lorem Pixel. And so now what do we want to do? Well, the obvious thing here is rather than having to refresh the page, let's add a little bit of interactivity. Let's add a button that's going to change the image for us. And so this is going to just give you a quick example of what actions are inside of Ember components. Basically, actions are very simple. They're like a declarative, event that you can define. So we're defining an event named new image or an action named new image, and then we just go into our components and we put them in this little sub-object called actions. They're just a function. I haven't even mentioned it, but what's going on here? We have imports, we have exports. What did I just do is this valid syntax even? What's going on here? We're using Babel. So what do we have? We have the future of the language accessible to us today, and we just transpile it down. And right now with Ember CLI, we actually transpile it down to ES3, so it works in i6, 7, and 8. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but here we are. We have concise object literal syntax. So we can actually, rather than doing, this is the equivalent of doing new image :function parens, right? We have this nice new syntax. We should be using it. We have this module system. We can start using it. So what is this actually going to do? It's going to do something really simple. It's just going to set random URL, basically, to something new. And because Lorem Pixel, actually the browser is like caching. It thinks that URL it's already downloaded the image for. So I have to add a little timestamp, basically, on the end to kick, cache bust effectively. So I'm just going to use, actually, what is this? Template strings. Yes, JavaScript has string interpolation, if you didn't know. You can actually use it now with these backticks. And what else does it allow us? Multi-line strings. Holy cow. JavaScript's real. It's like a real programming language now. Amazing. So here we are. We're using a few different ES6 features. And so now we can click this button, right? And what is it doing? It's going out and it's fetching a new image here. So this is a very simple component, but it exposes a couple key things, which is like we have a JavaScript implementation, we have a template, right? We have, from the template, we can call actions, right? Actions are kind of like they're like shorthand for setting up your own event listeners yourself, right? You don't want to have to set up an event listener and manage to set up and tear down of all your event listeners yourself. Actions kind of give you a really simple declarative way of specifying, events in the language of your application, right? Nobody likes trying to figure out what this click event handler is doing, right? We give you, we have a raw DOM event system, but we promote the usage of these actions, which are kind of, let you program, do event programming in the language of your application, right? So that it's more maintainable. It's easier for people to come in and just see what's happening, right? Super simple stuff. So that's components. Now, I wanted to kind of show off something really cool. I didn't plan this, but as I was doing the demo, I was like, oh, actually, this random image component, man, I could really show off something cool with animation here. And so I'm going to show you how easy it is using Liquidfire, which is one of the, it's an add-on. It's not bundled with Ember itself, but it's officially supported by the core team, and it's basically like if you want to do animation in Ember app, you use Liquidfire. That's the solution. And so I went ahead and Ember installed Liquidfire. You'll notice Ember install. What is this doing? This is actually an abstraction on top of NPM, because what this does is it installs the NPM package underneath the hood for you, and it does the right thing with like save dev so that you don't have to remember it. And inevitably somebody forgets to do it, pushes code out, and then finds out that they forgot to add the dependency, right? And it breaks the build, or your teammate can't actually run the app. So we've abstracted that away. And what else does it do? It also lets us run any setup code that might be necessary, and that could mean things like install the Bower package that plugin relies on. Or maybe it means generate a file in the file system that the plugin wants you to be putting configuration information for. So for example, like Ember CLI sauce. I'm pretty sure that it generates a file inside of the config directory where you just go pop your keys in, right? And so this is a nice little addition on top of NPM. But this is just an NPM package. So we're going to go ahead and now jump over. Come on. There we go. We're going to jump over to our code. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this image, when it changes, we're going to make it animate. And so I'm going to show you how easy this is to do with Liquid Fire. Now, our philosophy with animations is that you should not have to muddy up your implementation code with animation logic. Our ambition is to give you a declarative system for very easily animating any arbitrary piece of your template. So here we have this thing called liquid width. Now, liquid width is doing, it's not the best named thing, but I'll explain what it does. Random URL is going to change, right? It has a current value, and then when we click that action, it's going to set to another value. Now, if you know anything about doing animations on the web, what you typically have to do is you have to render you obviously have the before state rendered already, but you need to render the after state so that you can transition between the two, right? So liquid width basically is this kind of block helper that you put the template code in that you need to render for both the before and after states of the animation. And what you can do is you provide it an object or a property that is going to be changing, and then what it will do is it will detect that that property changed, it will go render the new thing using that new value, and then it will coordinate the transition between the old state and the new state in the DOM for you automatically. So what we're doing here is we're taking what was a random URL property, and we're actually basically aliasing it to this thing we call it, this is a block param. This is going to be, URL will be, the thing that's actually, it will be the old value or the new value, right? So random URL is changing. URL then is actually, this is kind of like a scoped variable only to this chunk of the template. And so you can utilize this variable inside of the template, and that allows us to basically create two versions of it rather than both of them being bound to random URL, right? Random URL is changing. We don't want the old one to update, so we have this kind of little thing. You might be squinting or like confused a little bit. You'll get used to it once you use it. It's pretty simple. So now, what do we do? Well, I did this. Nothing is really changing. So we didn't actually, we're just proving that, like adding that didn't do anything. It didn't break anything without adding any extra configuration. So now let's add a configuration. Let's add use. Let's use crossfade. And so crossfade is actually a transition name. And so we have this concept of transitions. Liquid Fire brings that into the corpus of vocabulary and concepts in the Ember world. And so transitions are generic, reusable animation primitives. They define basically what it means to animate from a before state to an after state, and vice versa, right? So we'll see. So that crossfade is built into Liquid Fire. It's really easy to use. We just did use crossfade, and here we are, right? Now, if we go to the Liquid Fire docs, we'll see the Liquid Width demo in the documentation has a transition called rotate below. And so we're actually going to go, and we're going to see, you can basically put this in app transitions rotate below, and this is the kind of code you're writing. It's a really nice promise-based animation API. It's actually built on top of a library called Velocity.js, which you might have heard of. And so the idea is that you can basically handle a lot of the complexity of animating from an old state to a new state and having a nice, really simple declarative JavaScript API that will dynamically choose whether to use like CSS transitions or actual JavaScript animation. So Velocity kind of abstracts that, and it makes it super simple to do. So I'm going to go and actually, this is showing off that Liquid Fire can actually add generators themselves. So add-ons can add generators, and so it added a transition generator. And so now I can go generate this rotate below transition. So that's just creating a file for us. And it actually has a bunch of boilerplate. And so this is what basically the most simple animation transition looks like. You get an old thing and a new thing, and basically you can stop any old animations, then you can animate, do something with the new thing, and yada, yada, yada. It's a really simple, kind of promise-based API. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste in that sample code that I got from their website. And, I won't go too much into this, but it's doing some cool, like, transform origin stuff and rotate Z. And so let's see what that actually does for our demo. All we have to do now is just change that to rotate below. It's a little glitchy because my random images are My random image generator isn't very great, but yeah, that's all it took, right? We took something, we got to declaratively add animation on top of it in what turned out to be 2 lines of template code, right? Just decorated the markup that we wanted to decorate, and voila, we're off to the races. So I've been alluding to this thing, I've been mentioning these things called add-ons. I've been talking about how, you can start imagining some of the value when you have this like full stack front-end framework. What more can you do? You saw Ember install, right? Well, since we've created this stuff, it's like a year old, barely a year old. We've gone from no add-ons to having over 1,000 add-ons. And we have not only that, but our community is unbelievable. And we've got great resources now. Geez, am I on Wi-Fi? Hopefully. Come on, load, buddy. So we have great resources like emberaddons.com. And here, this is right now just a list of all the latest published Ember add-ons. And so this is the kind of place you want to go. If it's like, oh, I want to do something with Bootstrap. Here's all the Bootstrap add-ons. They're scored. This is an automated scoring system. We go into every repo. We look at, do they have tests? When was the last commit? How many contributors exist outside? And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. What else do? We give you the ability to publish a demo link from the listing. So if you're a developer and you're like, oh, I need an autocomplete, or oh man, I really like Select 2. Well, guess what? We have a 10 out of 10. This is the plugin for you, right? And you can get that picture very quickly by just looking at the scores. And so how many of you like Google around for things, find a jQuery plugin, realize, oh, it's not maintained anymore after you've already downloaded it, tried using it. Oh, it doesn't work with this version of jQuery. It doesn't, whatever. This is the kind of stuff that you don't have to worry about anymore when you're using Ember. And so we also have Ember Observer. And Ember Observer is actually the system that is doing that rating. But this actually aims to categorize and curate the add-on ecosystem and organize it by, group, like category. And so, if you want animation, surprise, surprise, Liquid Fire up at top, right? And you can actually click in here, and we can see. So it turns out I think there is actually a little bit of a manual view process. And, basically, there's a bunch of automated stuff. And this is just like the first revision. This is like a couple months old. We can go great places with this kind of community and this kind of infrastructure. And so, that's a little sampling of where the Ember ecosystem is right now. And, these things are, like you saw, Ember install Liquid Fire. That's the entry point. No more downloading zip files or, using, and then like reading instructions and then manually wiring up, the configuration. You can install you can go from like Ember install, my calendar or my date picker, and then just start using the my date picker component in your template. That's it. No configuration. So that's the kind of value you can bring to an ecosystem when you start having opinions about the tooling around it as well, right? And Ember is uniquely positioned right now, although Angular's coming up closely, trying to steal our good ideas. So we welcome them because this is a whole bunch of open source code and a platform built on open source, and there's no like corporate backing for Ember or any of the Ember projects. We just do this as a group of volunteers, and some of us do consulting, and that helps offset the amount of time we're spending doing community work. But we're seeing now a great adoption rate right now in the enterprise. Your friends down the street, LinkedIn, have basically now changed their stack to be Play and Ember. So Play on the back end, Ember on the front end, throughout the whole org. And so they're pumping a lot of great resources and effort into bringing Ember's story to be even more enterprise friendly, right? So we've got a lot of exciting work happening thanks to now, being such a mature ecosystem. getting enterprise users in that have the capability to help fund some of the work that we've been wanting to do for a long time, but as a group of volunteers, our jobs aren't working on the framework. Our jobs use the framework, but yeah, so we've been building for ourselves, really, right? Trying to get to that promised land. So Ember 2.0 is coming tomorrow, and I just want to talk a little bit before I complete here about the philosophy behind Ember 2.0. And in general, the philosophy behind Ember. We want stability without stagnation, right? A lot of us on the Ember core team have basically made a blood vow to work on this thing for the next 10 years. We're not going anywhere. We're going to outlive every framework. I predict we will outlive every other framework because no other framework is actually community-driven like ours is, and that's very intentional. Every other framework is corporate-backed usually, and so it's up to that company wants to downsize and kill the the development teams. Then what happens to the community? What happens to the framework? We don't believe that's a good way of building up a community of people that want to be building products that need to rely on this foundation being stable and long-lasting. So, when we say without stagnation, what do we mean by that? Well, Glimmer is an example of that. This really cool project came out of Facebook, React. It pioneered in a lot of ways some things like virtual DOM and this, re-render everything kind of programming model, which is really conceptually simpler than a lot of the things that most of the frameworks are doing at the time. And so we were able to assimilate those good ideas, bring them into Ember without breaking your apps, and just upgrade and boom, there you go. This is stability without stagnation, right? You can rely on us, and you don't have to worry about the next hype technology eating our lunch. We're going to eventually catch up to it. Like that, we intend to. All good ideas are going to end up in Ember. Ember is going to be, Ember kind of shoots to be the glue between web standards as well. And so we're not just, out there cowboying. We actually work with the standards bodies. Yehuda Katz, one of the creators of Ember, is actually on TC39. He's on the JavaScript standards body. So Ember has a seat at the table. It's actually the React team has a seat as well. So the React and Ember teams are the only two frameworks, I believe, that have a seat at the standards bodies. And we are also frequently visiting other W3C working groups. And so we're out there trying to move the platform forward. And we want Ember to do less eventually, because that means we can kick up our feet and stop doing having to maintain the stuff that the platform evolves itself. And so that means no big bang releases either. I didn't really talk about it yet, but 2.0 actually it's actually the same as 1.13. And I think I have slides for that in a sec, so we'll talk about that. It's not a big rewrite. There is no long-lived branches. So that means you don't have to rewrite your app for Ember 2.0 either. You just upgrade from 1.13 pretty flawlessly. And so, of course, that means that we can stamp out any agility. We don't want any agile software process. No, I'm just kidding. Agile's great. So we've agiled the upgrade for you, right? And so let's talk about how we did that. You should check this out if you haven't read it. It was basically it's a RFC. We are really set on being a community project, and so we have a formal RFC process for anybody in the community to actually propose new features for Ember and have a discussion around that. And so we actually, as the core team, went and told, we got together in a room. We do that like 4 times a year. And we, back in December, published what we thought the plan should be for Ember 2.0. And, solicited feedback from the community. And so what we actually did, you should go read this if you haven't already, and you should check out the RFCs that are out there. But basically, we outlined all the things that we wanted for 2.0. And you know how we executed on it? We actually just put all those features in 1.x. And so you didn't have to you were actually getting those features along the way to 2.0. And so why, if that's the case, then why are we even creating a 2.0? And really, it's to remove deprecated code. Ember 1.0 is almost 2 years old. We've learned a lot. We've deprecated a lot. We want to move the platform forward. So we've been having deprecation messages. If you haven't upgraded, you've got a bunch of if you haven't removed your deprecated code usage, that stuff is disappearing in 2.0. Now there is a bunch of stuff that we've deprecated more recently that we know is going to be really hard for people to just eliminate. We don't want to leave anybody behind on Ember 1.x. So we've actually pluginified, or we will be before 2.0 final is released. We're going to be pluginifying a lot of the deprecated things that big apps are probably relying on, and can't just like spend two iterations trying to just remove deprecated code. There's very little value. It's hard to do that in the real world, and so we're pluginifying that stuff so that you can come to 2.0 even though it's removed from the framework. But what's important there is that it reduces the file size, obviously, of the framework, but it also keeps new users from stumbling upon that stuff, and that's important. We need to be pruning our APIs and keep things conceptually simple. We also want to drop IE 6, 7, and 8 support, which we've had forever. So it's time. That's all I'm going to say. It's time. Notably, we did not drop IE 9. IE 9 has ES5 support, which is the big thing that we've been basically wanting. And so IE 9, we don't get the things that we have planned for 2.0, where IE 9 isn't really holding us back too much to execute on those. And enough people in the community were like, please don't. We have to support IE 9 for the next whatever 6 months. It's kind of a weird point. Like our 2.0 is kind of coming right as IE 9, I think, is being end of life, and so we've got another 6 months or so until Microsoft does, and who knows, they'll probably extend it like they always do, and yada yada yada. So it just didn't make sense for us to eliminate IE 9, but we want Ember 3.0 to come perhaps a little sooner than these 1.0s and 2.0s have been, and so maybe within a year or year and a half or so, we'll be probably dropping IE 9 and Ember 3.0, right? But what else? The improved programming model. I kind of been alluding to this the whole time. We want Ember 2.0 to be a thing that people come and look at. If they've seen Ember before, they're coming back to look at it again. We want to show off our improved programming model, that a lot of that is related to Glimmer and HTML bars. And so we want people to look again, and of course having a 2.0 is a big milestone. We want people to come back and see. Why else, though? It's also marking a very important maturity point in the framework and its related projects. We're basically saying all of the Ember and Ember core related supported projects are going to have lockstep semantic versioning. So when you're upgrading Ember, you'll know that all of the official Ember projects are also going to be guaranteed to work with that version of Ember that you're upgrading to. No other open source ecosystem has these kinds of stability and kind of enterprise-friendly guarantees, right? So we take this stuff seriously because we're tired of having to upgrade and then things don't work and we can't do our upgrade because, oh, this dependency isn't upgraded, yada, yada, yada. So the things that like Liquidfire, Ember Data, our data library, we have some other cool stuff like ListView and Ember CLI itself. These projects are all going to be basically coordinated. Their releases are going to be coordinated so that we are moving in lockstep, basically, so that we know everything's going to work great for everybody using it. So, like I said, all these features have landed already in Ember 1x, so you don't actually have to wait to use Ember 2.0. It's already there. You're using it today. If you go download 1.12 or 1.13, a lot of these features are already there. And so, it's coming to an NPM near you. And to follow along with all of the latest news, you should definitely keep, visit our blog and, read from top down. And so yeah, with that, I'll open it up to Q&A. Yeah.
Wait for the
wait
for
the applause or something. Yeah. Thank you. All right.
You do a nice job presenting.
Thank you.
I'm sold.
All right, great. Yeah, here's my business card. Call me up. I'll come in. Yeah.
So what I was wondering is, of what you showed today, what of that is in 1.13 versus? Okay.
This is all.
So what is
no
in
2.0 anything?
So there's nothing in 2 aside from what you showed. Aside from what's
I have
in
another
1.13.
presentation where I have some comedic slides where I say, all right, what's in 2.0, and then there's like no features. There are no features in 2.0. There will be features in like 2.1 and 2.2 or whatever, but Ember 2.0 is literally Ember 1.13, but with all of the deprecated code chopped out. That's all it is. So the whole point of that was to have a story for upgrading. We don't want to leave people behind. The only reason you'll stay behind in 1.13 is if you want IE 8, 6, 7, or 8 support. And the idea is that our story for that is you'll just be able to upgrade to 2.0 when you can drop that dependency, right? And so then you can start upgrade. You can upgrade to 2.0 after you can drop support, and then just start going up the chain from 2.0 to 2.1 to 2.2, whatever. We usually recommend people do that just in case because it reduces the risk of perhaps. We try to be as semver as possible, but JavaScript, hey, you can't, it's a pretty dynamic language. You can't always guarantee that undefined behavior or whatever private API you might have been using, it hasn't been changed or something. So yeah, we don't want to leave anybody behind. That's the real message here. So we have, like I said, we've agiled your upgrade for you. If you've removed that deprecated code or you need to install the plugins that will bring back the deprecated functionality, you can just upgrade to 2.0. That's it. So.
Just a reminder on Intuit TV, if you have a question, simply type it into the chat
So
and
wait,
we'll voice
did
it.
you give me something to bribe them with?
That's true.
This is a watch, apparently?
It's a watch.
It's not an Apple Watch, but
It's
a...
definitely not an Apple
All right.
Watch. You could buy probably 500 of those watches for the price of one Apple Watch.
Well, now they're not going to. Now that they know it's so cheap, they're not going to answer a question. All right. So any other questions? How much time do we have? Are we over time? I hope not. 10, 15?
14? Yeah, we still have about 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So the acceptance testing thing that you showed was really cool, and currently within our team, we really have those problems too, like we're setting wait timeouts everywhere.
Yeah.
Is it possible to use that as a standalone targeting a non-Ember framework?
I mean, in theory, the concepts that it's built upon could be extended to another framework. The thing is, like, the thing I keep kind of, like I mentioned, it's a full stack framework. What that enables you to do is make assumptions about how the applications are built and what kind of things they're using. And so it's really, you're going to be hard-pressed, I think, to build something that's super generic that can do that kind of stuff, because without making everybody have to, like, register. So we have a system called waiters, and waiters are like the sources of asynchrony. And so you can basically register a waiter object, and that thing knows how to, like, monitor asynchrony somehow. So, for example, like jQuery has basically a ref counter for current AJAX calls being, and so that's one of the things we use to detect. I mean, there's nothing, it's actually not that sophisticated of a system. If you dove in, you could probably figure out how it worked, and you could enable something like that. The one caveat is that it actually relies upon the fact that it's a client-side application to do routing, because Selenium allows you to actually change the browser's page, right? But since we're building a single-page app, we can actually run cross-route tests without having to, within the same JavaScript context. And so that makes the test reporting, the test runner story a lot simpler. And so that's one caveat. Like, this wouldn't work if you were, like, needed to, like, redirect to some, like, single sign-on service. You would probably end up mocking that out so that you could avoid that. But yeah, it's kind of like it's a little bit purpose-built, but there's some gems of, that you could probably, use anywhere. So, yeah. Any other questions?
I've got one
we got
question.
One more right here.
I've got one question.
Yes.
You kind of showed the add-ons, and I don't know about other people, but when I saw the add-ons with the rating scores,
Yeah.
that to me was mind-blowing, because I know I've gone through the process of trying to find something, only to find out it's deprecated or it's old or it's crappy or something like that. Is that process that you guys built open sourced?
Yeah, so we didn't build that. Somebody in the community built it. They just wrote some, stuff that ran on, like, Heroku or, like, AWS that went out, grabbed from NPM's API. So every Ember add-on has, like, a keyword in the package JSON, and that's how Ember CLI auto-discovers them. Like, so it looks at your dependencies, it looks at all the dependencies package JSONs, it finds the things that say they're Ember add-ons. And so then it can auto-configure them. It can auto-discover them, basically. And so that package JSON, NPM has actually, like, makes it searchable. And so what emberaddons.com is doing is just going to NPM's API saying, give me all the things that have Ember add-on as a keyword. And then somebody was like, okay, I've got the list. Now I'm going to write a little spider that goes to GitHub or goes to whatever the repo, the repository URL is in the package JSON, and I'm going to go start doing some analysis on that. And so I think they just wrote it in Ruby or something. But that's all open source. And so there's a community of people that are working on improving that as well. But we got surprised by that at EmberConf in March. A friend of mine in the community, Katie Gengler, actually wrote it with her husband. They live out in New Jersey, and she does a bit of Ember consulting. And she was like, Ruby had something like this. She wanted Ember to have it. And so they just wrote it over a couple weekends, I think. And she actually did it as a lightning talk at EmberConf and shocked us all with that. And so then Ember add-ons was already a thing. And they just, they've been working together, Ember add-ons and Ember Observer. And so they've integrated the ratings from Ember Observer into Ember add-ons. And so now, the community is just doing this for us. I mean, the core team is now 12 people. It was as small as 4 or 5 in the early days. And so, we can only do so much. Like, we're busy enough just maintaining all of this stuff, all this infrastructure that enables us to give you guys this kind of development experience. And so, one of the other so here's some other things that are happening. We want add-on. So Katie also, as part of Ember Observer work, she wrote this great add-on called Ember Try. And what it does is it actually runs every add-on in every version of Ember. And so it actually lets add-on authors know when their add-ons stop working in betas or canary releases and stuff. And so we want to take that even further. And so because we have this predictable release cycle and we have a bunch of automation behind that, there are companies that actually have their test suites running against Ember automatically, and then they tell us if we cause regression. So we actually want to automate that. We want to have an anonymous, basically CI, basically like a collection, anonymous collector that if you want, we make it super easy for your CI to report to us anonymously when, versions of Ember break. The Ember upgrades break your app's tests. And so that's the kind of next further extension. Rust actually has something like this for its add-on. We want the same thing for the add-on ecosystem, have basically a centralized build of every add-on. So when we push a new change to Ember, we can just go to one place and see the status of all of the add-on builds. Most of them are using Travis, and Travis has an API, so we could probably build that pretty easily. But we want the same kind of thing for apps in a way, so our big clients or big users can actually opt in to providing this information to the core team, which helps us build a better, stabler Ember for them, right? So that kind of stuff is within reach. We just have to focus on and execute on it. So, yeah.
Airbnb
Yes.
mentioned, was talking about isomorphic JavaScript. He said you guys didn't like calling it that, but he said that you were heading that direction with 2.0. Could you speak a little bit about that?
It's not actually 2.0 specific. So there's actually, yes, so we have a thing called Fast Boot. So Fast Boot is basically a add-on that you just install in Ember CLI, and now it makes your Ember CLI app a deployable Node.js application. And so what that does is it basically makes it an application server that serves built server-side rendered versions of your Ember application. So if you need that for SEO purposes, there you go. That's working today, the SEO side. The thing this is still very, very alpha. But basically, you install Ember CLI Fastboot, and then effectively now you can just run Ember Fastboot, and now you've got a server that you can just curl. You can curl it, and you'll see the rendered output. Now, there are some caveats to this. We don't do anything fancy with JS DOM or anything, so we actually don't try to execute certain types of code, but most of your Ember apps, templates and whatnot, can just be rendered for SEO purposes. Now, what we're doing, what the next iteration of this is actually funded by LinkedIn, and they're going to enable us to actually, we have basically, the architecture supports here what we call rehydration. So if the server generates a bunch of static markup for you, you can actually then rehydrate it and have the client basically take over that DOM, and now any further changes client side just mutate the existing server rendered DOM. And so that was an important feature for LinkedIn because basically they They send out an email. Somebody clicks that link from their email, and it ends up at an Ember app. They want that Ember app to load. They want the perceived performance to be extremely high because they know they're going to make money. They're going to make more money if the performance is higher, right? Like, it's kind of a known thing usually. So, so they've been really gracious to actually fund the work on Fastboot. And so they're actually running Fastboot in Nashorn on the JVM. So, you know, if you go out, if you go around the Nashorn mailing list, you'll probably see them talking about a bunch of, you know, JavaScript-related infrastructure stuff because they're basically going to have a farm of these Fastboot servers pre-rendering stuff for some segment probably of their user base. So, yeah, this is kind of like I consider this an optimization, basically. It's an optimization for initial load time, and then you don't use it after that. Everything's client-side after that because you're going to get better performance. You don't want to go to the server to ask for it to render this stuff anyways. And so they're also trying to do some really sophisticated caching around this stuff because, you know, it takes time to render stuff on the server. And so if you really want low latency, you need to have some intelligent caching system here as well. So yeah, that work's all kind of being, you know, that's in progress right now. I don't know, like, if you don't, I don't think there's any like dates or anything to give you about it, but it's a big priority for them, and they're, you know, funding a lot of this work, so it's going to happen. So, yeah.
So, can you please talk about Ember data and how it would map to a custom API that does not stick to the JSON API spec?
Okay, yeah. So I didn't have enough time to talk about Ember data, but Ember data is basically like, you know, the kind of batteries included data framework that you can use inside of Ember. Ember, it's not a requirement. You can bring your own data library. You know, Ember actually has a very like nice conventional system around promises. So if you are fetching data and you give Ember a promise, it can do things like give you an automatic loading state. And so you can define templates for like what it should look like, what parts of the application should look like when they're loading. And so if there's a promise that's yet resolved, Ember will actually render your loading template for you. And then when the promise is done, it will tear it down and render the actual output. And so we have that nice system built on top of promises. And then, you know, if you've got a very conventional backend service, if you've got a standardized JSON format, basically, for your services, then you can bring in Ember data, which makes it as simple as like these generate commands to basically, you know, generate models, define schemas for those models, and then you don't write any of the data fetching logic. Or if you do, as the question was, like, how do we do custom stuff? Ember Data has kind of pioneered this thing called JSON API, and it actually just 1.0'd. And so now Ember Data is starting to, like, you know, update itself to adhere to the JSON API spec. And JSON API, it's JSONAPI.org. I'm not super involved with that work, so I can't speak too much in detail about it. But basically, like, you know, we've found that conventions are good in Emberland. And so, you know, we can be even more productive interfacing with our backend engineers if we have an agreed upon format, if we don't have, for the transport layer, right? If we don't have to, you know, manually handcraft JSON on the server and then manually, you know, determine how to access the data from any service from the front end, then we can move a lot faster in lockstep. So JSON API is all about, like, let's take all the use cases that we can find and let's build a solution that makes it easy for us to, like, never have to think about how data's coming, you know, is being transported back and forth from a front end. And so JSON API, so Ember Data kind of is built for JSON API in a way, but it's built with it's actually agnostic to formats. And so it has the, you know, objects like an adapter and a serializer, and you can just override those things with the, you know, semantics and configuration that your API server might need. And so it's a lot of the work that's gone in Ember Data has been actually making it generic and flexible enough to support many different types of APIs. It was, if we chose to just, like, from the beginning have some standard JSON format, we could have just scenario solved our way probably through to a 1.0. But we wanted to have some kind of you know, agnostic data layer on top, or that, you know, that was easily usable with Ember and that could be used on top of anybody's API within reason. You know, there are some crazy APIs out there. But to further answer the question, there's actually work being done right now where, you know, to make, if you don't want to understand like the serialization and adapter system in Ember data, there's some work being done that allows you to basically, conceptually what you want to do is you want to just take your JSON, whatever form it is, and then basically munge it, transform it into something like JSON API, and then you can just load it in Ember data, and that's all you have to worry about. So the documentation is going to be, updated as Ember data is not 1.0 yet, so it's going to be 1.0ing with Ember 2.0, and so you're going to start seeing a lot more documentation and kind of the plan forward there soon. But right now, the short version of the story is check out serializers and adapters. They have the hooks, and they're the way that you can customize how Ember data works. So.
It's the time we have for
right.
questions. Now, I did want to.
I didn't give out the watch.
Yes, so you get
Should
to
I
choose.
just throw it into the crowd? You all can fight over it.
Would you be available for a breakout if anybody wants to have any
so
more
I
questions?
do have to. Right immediately after, I do have to run.
Okay.
Actually,
Okay.
Around 11. So.
All right,
Yeah.
then
We can chat outside.
chat outside if you have any more questions. One thing I want to remind you is that we're web developers, and over the weekends we should be building our own personal websites, our next puppy finder or something like that. So he's releasing tomorrow. This is a good chance to, throw away your plans for this weekend and build your first Ember app.
Well, no, I would actually wait until Ember 2.0 stable comes out.
Okay.
Don't mess with the betas too
You
much
can still
if you're a
build,
new user,
but you can use
yes.
1.13.
Use 1.13 if you want. Play with Ember CLI. Just install it off npm, play with it. But if you've got plans this weekend, just wait for a few more weeks. Just wait. In 6 weeks, we'll have Ember 2.0 stable. The documentation will be more up to date and fleshed out, and it'll be really the time to start looking at Ember again, or for the first time. So
sounds great. We have a short break, and then next room over there will be Philip tell us about performance, and then we're going to be hearing about Mithril, which is another framework in this one.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.